Another honor I have is to introduce our speaker tonight, Dave Ferguson. Let me just go off the script here. You hated it when Donald Trump went off the script, but let me just go off the script for a bit here, because you never know what would come out of his mouth. But, oh yeah, Russell went there, yeah. Mixed politics with religion. What are you gonna do, fire me? No, anyways. Dave, you're getting a kind of a sense of what's happening here, right? So, there are a few people in the world who you've never met before, but they speak so deeply and significantly in your life and mentor you. I've read Dave's books, and my life has been, I'm just telling you, my life has been transformed by some of his writings, and specifically the latest book, Bless, that he wrote with his brother. If you haven't picked it up, it's free in the lobby. We're giving it away to you registrants, so grab a copy. Dave has a profound understanding of church planting. He's a pastor. He pastors Community Christian Church in Chicago and in the surrounding area. He's a church planter, so he knows what it means to self-sacrifice. He knows what it means to commit to something and stay committed to it until God brings fruitfulness and life. He's the founder and president of New Life. It's a church planting movement, New Thing. He's an author of Hero Maker, Bless, other books, and most of all, he's the president of Exponential. And so, would you give Dave Ferguson a warm Canadian welcome as he comes and delivers the message?
Thanks very much. All right, good evening. How you guys doing? It is good to be here. This is my first time in Victoria. I had no idea how gorgeous this place was. Yeah, and Ken's already invited me back just for holiday, so thank you very much. I may take you up on that. And you know what, let's just pause and thank Ken and the whole district team for pulling this together. So thank you very, very much. And I also want to say thank you to your kind of denomination. I'm a church planter. I planted an independent church, but I think I want to be. I don't know what's it take. How do I get in? How do I get to be a Pentecostal? Because here's the deal. I was reading this week that the global convention, I guess, happened. Am I getting this approximately right? In Madrid, Spain. How many of you guys are aware of this? In Madrid, Spain, and there are currently 650,000 Pentecostal churches globally. And you guys, okay, are asking God in the next 7 years for another 350,000 brand new churches. How about that? Now that's an applause line. What happened there, okay? For 1 million churches the next 7. So, here's what I was thinking about this, and it's kind of two different things. My assistant Sarah, she was talking about how well organized things were here, and she said she said, I don't know why, but they seem really insistent that you need to be here. And to be honest with you, I've never been to Victoria. I know some of the folks in the room here, not anybody real well, and so I was kind of going like, yeah, I'm on my way to California. This is gonna be I'll be delighted to speak to these people, but like, why me? And she said, I don't know, but they were really insistent they wanted you here. And something hit me as we were worshiping Him, and maybe this is it. If as a denomination, as a fellowship, if you all are talking about going from 650,000 to 1 million churches in the next 7 years, am I right? Yeah. Okay, I am right about that. Okay, I'm not asking anymore. I'm right. And this district, this network, you have 213 churches. It sounds like they're counting on you for 100 and some brand new churches in the next 7 years. Am I right? Yeah. Let's do the math. Probably about 105 new churches in the next 7 years. And so the question I want to ask you is, how are you going to do that? And I think this is probably a really important question, and it's important because, well, a couple different things. Because one, we know that brand new churches will see 3 to 4 times as many conversions as do established churches 10 years of age or older. That's why new churches are important. 3 to 4 times as many conversions. They've done the research on this as do established churches 10 years of age or older. But here's the other reason why I think it's really important, and you may or may not be aware of this, but amongst all Christians, I mean, Pentecostals, you guys are leading the way. The rest of us are kind of counting on you to challenge us. And so when I read that and saw that, you want to go from 650,000 the next 7 years to 1 million new churches, 350,000 new churches. I'm going like, wow, that is an inspiring vision. I want to be a part of something like that. And so maybe the reason I'm here is maybe part of the reason here because I bring a great passion, a great love, a great conviction, and some experience in church planting. Maybe I'm here to help you go like, okay, how do we as a district, all right? Look at that, I'm already one of you. How do we, all right? How do we as a district, how do we plant 105 churches in the next 7 years? I want you to be praying about and think about that. I've already asked someone else to come up and do the ministry time at the end. And maybe for some of you, there's some things that are going to happen where the Spirit's going to speak to you. God's going to speak to you. Go like, oh, here's my part in that. Here's my part in that. And if the Spirit speaks to you and God moves in you going like, oh, this is what he's calling me to do, to be a part of that 105 brand new churches. Is it okay if I do a little vision casting here, Ken? 105 brand new churches in the next 7 years. Here's the part I have to play. Let me back up. I want to tell you a little bit of a story, and then I want to hit a couple of things. I think maybe God showed me how you guys can do this, and probably a whole lot more, to be honest. I was in a meeting with a guy named Millard Fuller. I don't know if that rings a bell to anybody, Millard Fuller. Millard Fuller was the guy who was the founder of Habitat for Humanity. How many of you know Habitat for Humanity? Okay, we're familiar with Habitat for Humanity. He was a guy who was a very successful New York attorney, actually quit his job as an attorney because he wanted to solve the problem of homelessness. And over the next handful of years now, since they were founded, they have now built homes for over 40 million people. 40 million people. One guy who had a vision for 40 million people. How did they do that? Well, I had the opportunity to meet with Millard, and I was actually with a couple real estate friends of mine. We had some questions we wanted to ask him, just a couple really specific questions that we particularly wanted to ask him, and that's why we'd waited and tried really hard to get this appointment with him. And we were hoping for maybe about 30 minutes with him. But we flew into Atlanta, drove from Atlanta, Georgia, to Americus, Georgia, this little bitty town where their headquarters was for Habitat for Humanity. And the guy was tremendously gracious. I mean, he spent most of the day with us. He drove us around Americus, Georgia, so we could view and get to see different Habitat for Humanity homes. Then he took us out for lunch and actually bought us lunch. And then he took us back to the office, his office, which was at that time was basically kind of like a mobile unit. And I remember sitting across from him across from the desk from him in his office. And he looked at me and my two buddies that were real estate developers, looked right at us, and he said this: "Don't you think everyone deserves a simple, decent place to live? Don't you think everyone deserves a simple, decent place to live?" And as he spoke that, I mean, that was his particular vision that God gave him. There was no disputing the truth that everybody deserved to have a roof over their head, that everyone should have a home. Nobody should be homeless. And I could feel, as he's talking this vision, I could feel the adrenaline kind of rushing through me. You've had those experiences where someone's saying things, you're going like, man, this has got to be the way, this has got to happen. It's got to happen. But I had no idea how it could happen. Everybody deserves a simple, decent place to live. Millions and millions of people are homeless. But everybody deserves, how do you get that done? And then he began to explain his strategy for that particular vision to me. He said, I knew that I couldn't just be a carpenter. If I was a carpenter, you know, that vision was too small. We'd never get it done. We'd only get a few houses. And I knew that I couldn't just start a construction company. Even though I could build more homes for people, that still wouldn't be big enough to make sure everybody had a simple, decent place to live. And then he pointed to my two friends. He said, I knew I couldn't be just a real estate developer either, because that might be thousands or tens of thousands, but that still would not get the job done. And he said, I knew I had to have a different strategy. I had to find a way to mobilize everyday people who are followers of Jesus to swing a hammer to build houses. If I could find a way to mobilize everyday people to swing a hammer for Jesus to build houses, then we could get it done. Guess who is today the largest home builder in the world? Talk to me. Come on, talk to me. Habitat for Humanity, that's right. Habitat for Humanity is the largest home builder in the world. 40 million people have homes thanks to Habitat for Humanity. Millard Fuller went on to explain, he told me this too, he said, and they're also the best built homes. I said, now how's that? He said, well, we use 3 times as many nails as everybody else. Okay, this has nothing to do with church planting, but I want you to think about the lesson that we learned just there. Because what I learned right there is, how did Habitat for Humanity become a movement? What did the leaders in Habitat for Humanity begin to do differently so that everybody could have a simple, decent place to live? And I want to propose 2 different things that happened. One is they became what I would call, and you're going to understand what this means, a level 5 organization. Number 1, they became a level 5 organization. Give me a little of this, okay? Level 5 organization. And the second thing that happened is that Millard Fuller and the other leaders in that organization didn't see themselves as the heroes, but they began to see the people that they were serving, the people they were developing, the people that they wanted to swing a hammer. They became hero makers. They became hero makers. Over the last several years in my role at Exponential, I'm the CEO of Exponential, and we do convene events both here in the United States, but then also other places around the world to really challenge people around this idea of church planting. What we discovered in doing some research is basically churches fall into 5 different levels, okay? 5 different levels. Let's go ahead and throw it up on the screen here, all right? 5 different levels. You have level 1 churches that are declining churches, okay? And about 35% of all churches, at least this is in the United States, and it's probably indicative of what's happening in Canada to a degree too, are in decline. Then level 2 churches are those churches that are plateaued, okay? They just stayed about, maybe went up a little bit, down a little bit, but basically stayed about the same. And again, you have about 35% of churches that are plateaued. Then you got level 3, which are growing churches. And the remaining 30% are growing churches. And then you got the whole 100%. Now, what happens for most leaders is most leaders think that the best that they can do is to grow. If I could just grow my church, that's the best they can do. But then we begin to ask the question, well, what about reproducing churches, level 4? Reproducing churches, those churches ever planted a site, ever planted a brand new church. And what we discovered in the U.S. is that now that number is about 7%. Of the total 100%, about 7%, okay, are actually reproducing churches. And then there are these level 5 churches that are movement-making churches, that are planting churches that plant churches that plant churches that plant churches, that are Acts 1:8 kind of churches from Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, the ends of the earth, and 2 Timothy 2 kind of churches, 4 generations of reproduction. And so we began to look at this and we said, okay, that's special 2 categories of level 4 and level 5, reproducing and multiplying churches, what it's going to take to get to that 105 churches that we need to see happen in the next 7 years. What is unique about the leadership of those churches? And when I say leadership, I mean, yes, the pastoral leadership, but I also mean the volunteer leaders all up and down the line. What is unique about the leaders of those level 4 and level 5 churches? You tracking with me? We actually convened a think tank down in Atlanta, brought everybody down to Atlanta, about 35 of the brightest people we possibly could, spent 2 days together, and we just began to talk about that and think about and do some homework on what is unique about the leaders of these level 4 and level 5 churches. And we began to make a list of all the different characteristics, all the different traits of these leaders on white sheets. And there was probably, 25 or 30 different characters or traits that we said were kind of unique. And some of them we kind of doubled up, so we'd cross some off and we'd kind of edit some together. But then I remember one guy, a guy named Dave Rhodes, he looked at that long list of leadership characteristics, leadership traits of reproducing and multiplying churches. He said, you know what's unique about these leaders of level 4 and level 5 churches? And he was the first to say this. He said, it's like they aren't trying to be the heroes. It's like they're trying to make everybody else around them a hero. And then someone else, and it wasn't me, even though I got a chance to write the book, they pointed to that list and said, you know what? Those folks are hero makers. That's who they are. That's who they are. And then as we began to look at the life and leadership of Jesus, I think if you look at the life and leadership of Jesus, that it aptly describes exactly who Jesus was as a leader. He was a hero maker. Look at John 14:12. In John chapter 14:12, we'll throw it up here on the screen. It says this. You've heard this verse before, but hear it kind of like for the first time. He says this. Jesus is speaking. He says, truly I tell you. Okay, he's talking to his apprentices. He's talking to his disciples. I tell you, whoever believes in me, you're going to do what I've been doing. And then he goes one more, doesn't he? He goes even beyond. He says, no. In fact, you're going to do even greater things than these. And I think what's happening here is I think Jesus is looking at his disciples and says, listen, you're going to reach more people than I ever will in my lifetime. You're going to take the gospel to more people and more places than I ever will. You are going to be the ones that are going to catalyze this movement of redemption and love that's going to transform this planet. You're going to be the ones that are going to write the best-selling book, the Bible. You're going to make a greater impact than I ever will do in my 3 years of ministry. And I think what Jesus was with them was a hero maker. Now sometimes people push back and say, oh no, but wasn't Jesus our hero? And yeah, he was. He was our hero. He stretched out his arms and died on the cross. But I'm talking about, because I'm talking to a room full of leaders in here. I'm talking about Jesus' leadership style, the way he led. And the way he led was he was a hero maker. All right, I want to get really specific, because if we're going to plant 105 churches, okay, in the next 7 years, we got to get really specific about this and get very strategic about it and figure out exactly what is it going to take. So what does it look like for you to be a hero maker? If that's the kind of people that lead these reproducing and multiplying churches, what does it take? What does it look like? Let me give you a couple different examples before I give you kind of some of the specifics behind what we discovered. One of the people that comes to mind for me is a guy named Bob Buford. I don't know if that name rings a bell. Bob was a mentor of mine. He made a truckload of money in the TV business, cable TV business. But when his only son suddenly died in a tragic accident, Bob came to what he called his halftime. And at halftime, he said he made a move from success to significance. And he actually wrote a book, sold more than 500,000 copies, called Halftime. The move from success to significance. And in the second half of his life, you could say that Bob went from, instead of trying to be the hero, he started making heroes of other people. He started 2 different organizations. One was called Leadership Network, which was to do everything he can to make pastors successful. And the second organization he started was Halftime, to do everything he could to make business leaders successful in making a difference. Bob had a saying, and this is a saying that I've adopted, and if you're going to be a hero maker, here's a saying you ought to just make this your motto. He would say this: my fruit grows on other people's trees. My fruit grows on other people's trees. Something else Bob would always tell me, too. He would say this. He says, we're the platform, we're not the show. We're the platform, we're not the show. And one of the things that Bob would do as a part of his own practice as a hero maker, he would always carry with him, okay, like a 3x5 card in his pocket. And on that 3x5 card, he'd have the names of 10, 11, 12 young emerging leaders. Okay, listen to me, this is an important practice. 10, 11, 12 young emerging leaders, he had it written on here. And those are the people he was investing in both relationally and financially. And for a while, I got to be one of the names on his list. Because he went from striving to be a hero maker. All right, let me give you another example, okay? Let me give you another example of what a hero maker looks like. And I'm going to go to a different experience, okay? But it'll help you. I think it'll help you think through this. I don't know. Do we have any folks in here that like running, distance running? Anybody a runner in here? We got 1, 2. Oh, we got a couple. Okay. Anybody? Let's throw up Shalane Flanagan's picture here. Okay. Anybody know the name Shalane Flanagan? Okay, I'm the only one. This should work. Here we go. Let me tell you about Shalane Flanagan. I love this story. Shalane Flanagan, okay, is perhaps one of, at least it was recently, because now she's coaching, was one of the greatest female distance runners in the United States. Shalane Flanagan, in the year 2017, she won the New York Marathon. Now that was a very big deal, because that was the first time that a female had won the New York Marathon in 40 years. I mean, every year it was always the Africans, someone from Kenya, someone from Ethiopia, but this time it was actually an American winning an American race. An article in the New York Times, listen to this article, describes Shalane Flanagan. It describes her this way. It says, when Shalane won the New York City Marathon last week, her victory was about more than just an athletic achievement. Of course, it's a remarkable one. She's the first American woman to win in 40 years, and she did so in a blistering time of 2 hours and 26 minutes. And if you've ever run a marathon, I've run a couple, I mean, that's a fast time. But here's what I want you to hear next. Listen to this as a church leader. Perhaps Flanagan's bigger accomplishment, though, lies in how she nurtures and promotes, this is right out of the New York Times, nurtures and promotes the rising talent around her, a rare quality in the cutthroat world of elite sports. Every single one of her training partners, all 11 women in total on Team Nike, made it to the Olympics while training with her. An extraordinary feat. They call it the Shalane effect. What's your name, sir? Logan. What is it? Logan. Okay, imagine if they had a Logan effect, right? You know Logan is up to some awesome stuff, but man, if I can just get close to Logan, right? If I just close, then I get to go to the Olympics too. That's the Logan effect. That's the Shalane effect. In the New York Times article, it goes on to describe not the Logan effect, but the Shalane effect. And it says this: she serves as a rocket booster for the careers of the women who work alongside her while catapulting herself forward as well. Shalane has pioneered a brand of, and think about this, church leaders, how sometimes we get so protective and we get so insecure because someone else has got some skills that we don't have or some gifts that we don't have, and maybe they're younger than we are. Listen, Shalane has pioneered a new brand of team mom to these young and up-and-comers with the confidence not to tear others down or to try to protect her place in the hierarchy. That's a hero maker. So that was 2017, right? She wins the New York City Marathon. First time a female American's won it in 40 years. Then 2018 comes the Boston Marathon. It's been 33 years since any female Americans won the Boston Marathon. What do you think happens? Help me out. Come on, you gotta start thinking like a hero maker. What is it? There you go, that's exactly right. Did you hear that? No, Shalane doesn't win it. You know what happens? Shalane goes to Des Linden. Des Linden is this great female runner who every year, always comes in second or just comes in third, never quite finishes, can't quite get it done, right? Shalane literally goes to Des Linden and says, Des, this is your year. That year in 2018, the Boston Marathon, the worst of conditions. It's raining, it's cold, runners are dropping out. They run almost the entire race together. In fact, so much so, they both stop to go to the bathroom at the exact same time on this marathon. At the very end, Shalane doesn't have it, but it's Des Linden that actually wins and becomes the first female American with her encouragement to win the Boston Marathon in 33 years. It doesn't even stop there. Think about this now. This was so fascinating to me. 2021 comes. The Olympic marathon trials. Typically for the Olympic marathon trials, there's about 100 women that make the qualifying time. But because of the Shalane effect, because so many women were so inspired by who she was and how she encouraged and tried and cheered for everybody else around her, there were 5 times as many women made the time trials. That's how movement happens. You want to start 105 brand new churches? We need hero makers. That's what we need. We need people who aren't trying to be the heroes, but are saying, you know what? I'm going to make heroes of other people. All right, now let me get painstakingly practical, and I'm going to keep moving here, okay? I want to give you five practices. If you're going to be a hero maker, we're going to pull this off in the next 7 years. I want to give you 5 practices. If you do these things, I guarantee, because this is the way Jesus did it. We will blow past that, and we will more than do our part of that million that we're trying to get planted around the world, all right? Now, I'm going to need your help on this. Here's the 5. Let's go to the next slide, all right? Here's the 5 different practices. I'm going to need your help. This is kind of like you're in children's church, but that's okay. It'll help you. Remember this. The first one is multiplication thinking. Everybody point your head. Go ahead and come on, work with me. Point your head. We got to have a shift in how you think. Come on, point your head. There you go. Thank you very much. We're going to shift in how you think, because you're going to start thinking about multiplication. Now, here's the second one, permission giving. Okay, permission giving. Point to your eyes. You're going to start seeing the people that are sitting in your pews, sitting in your chairs, your church, you're going to start seeing them differently and start seeing the potential in them. I had a conversation today with a church planner, and he was like, well, where do you get your church planners? And I said, well, who's in your church? Okay? Am I right? We got to start seeing those folks different. Those are not people that just tithe. They're not just people that serve in the 5th grade Sunday school class. Those are potential church planners. Here's the third thing. Put your hand on your heart. Okay? This is called disciple making. Put your hand on your heart. Go ahead and do that. You're going to start sharing your life with some of those folks in a different way than you ever have before. You're going to think different, you're going to see different, and you're going to start sharing your life different. Here's the fourth one, okay? The fourth one is called gift activation, and it's a change in how you bless. Hold your hands out like this. We already saw this demonstrated today, and I love it. Instead of asking God to bless me, just like we saw on the stage, you're going to do this. You're going to ask God to bless others, and you're going to send them out. Instead of asking God just to bless me, you're going to bless others and send them out. And here's the last one. Do like this, like you're counting, okay? It's going to be a change in how you count. Instead of counting who's coming to my thing, what's way more important is who am I sending out to do God's thing. Way, way more important. I'm telling you, if we get these 5 things down, we're going to blow past these 105 churches we're going to plant in the next 7 years, all right? Let's just hit them real quick here. Take some notes, take it in. Pray about this. See if God's not prompting you to make some changes about some of these things so you can be a hero maker. All right, point your head, okay? Point your head again. Shift in how you think. And this first shift is multiplication thinking. Okay, it's a shift in how you think, where you move from thinking the best way for me to maximize my ministry impact is through me. Instead, you go like, no, it happens through others. The same way that Millard Fuller said, you know what? I can't just be a carpenter. I got to get every person to swing a hammer. That's what that kind of shift in your thinking. That was Jesus' idea in Acts 1:8. He said, the Holy Spirit's going to come on you, and you are going to be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the ends of the earth. Actually, 3 different times in that simple verse, one of the last things Jesus says before he leaves planet Earth, he says, you. Not me, no, you guys are going to do it. And I'm going to equip you to make sure you do it. He had multiplication thinking. And here's why you got to start thinking different. Multiplication thinking is most often catalyzed by the vision of a compelling cause, a greater battle, or a bigger dream. I think it happened for me just a little while ago. I was going like, hold it, these guys are all Pentecostals. They're trying to plant 1 million churches. That's a big dream, am I right? They want to have 1 million churches. And it caused me to think differently. Because I started going, well, if they're doing 1 million and this district's got 213, then what's their part? Well, at least 105. It made me start thinking differently. Because if somebody would have said, well, how many do you think, Ken, how many should we plant the next? Well, I don't know, if we do 15, that'd be pretty good. You need a bigger vision. I remember I was sitting in a workshop. It was a setting kind of like this, probably a little smaller actually. There's a guy named Neil Cole. And he asked this question. He says, what's the dream for your church? What's the dream for your church? And I was a young church planter, and my dream was this. I wanted to have 1,000 people in my church. Listen to the way I even said it. I wanted to have 1,000 people in my church. Do you hear what I'm saying? 1,000 people in my church. And I remember he said this. He said, I want you to take your current dream and multiply it by 1 million. So I did the math. 1,000 times 1 million. 1,000 times 1 million equals, help me out, 1 billion. And then he said this. He said, now I want you to figure out how do you do that? And all of a sudden, it just kind of exploded my brain, right? Because I kind of thought maybe I could teach well enough to hold the attention of 1,000 people, or maybe I could get 100 small groups of 10 people each, and that'd get to 1,000 people, so I could administrate well enough. Somehow I could get to 1,000 people. But all of a sudden, when he changed it to 1 billion, I knew I couldn't accomplish that through one leader. I was going to have lots of different people plant lots of multiplying churches. I was going to have lots of leadership residents. I was going to have to do all kinds of commissioning like you just saw up here over and over again. In fact, I would probably have to work with people outside of my own fellowship, my own little brotherhood, my own little denomination, if I'm going to pull off something like 1 billion people. And all of a sudden, he got me thinking about building God's kingdom instead of building my own castle. And suddenly, it was like, with 1 billion, I knew I couldn't do it. I could not be the hero. And see, that's what multiplication thinking does. And so I want to challenge you. Get a dream that's so big that it makes you dependent on God. If you don't have a dream for your church or your ministry that doesn't make you dependent on God, you need to get a bigger dream. So that's the first thing. It starts with this multiplication thinking, Acts 1:8 kind of thinking. Here's the second practice. Point to your eye, okay? Now I'm going to shift, I'm going to change, okay, how you see the world. And this is what we call permission giving. Because you're going to take the focus off of your own leadership and put that focus on the leadership potential of all the people around you. We see this again in the life of Jesus. He takes this group of ragtag working class follows and he says, hey, come follow me. They never expected a rabbi to see in them somebody worth teaching. But Jesus saw the potential in them. He saw somebody that could change the world. And then he gave them permission to do it. I remember, this goes way back. I was like a middle school, I was a middle schooler. I was probably like, 12 or 13. And I was at church camp, okay? Church camp in the summer. And one of the guys that was at church camp who was like a helper, a counselor, one of the adults there, was a guy named Dennis Gamoff, okay? Dennis Gamoff, the Dennis Gamoff. Dennis Gamoff, because as a little dude, I loved basketball. I loved hoops, right? Dennis Gamoff had been a high school basketball All-American in the Chicago area. Not only that, he went on and he played in the Big Ten. I mean, that was so if you're a little dude at camp, I mean, that's a big deal, right? And I remember we just finished playing softball, and of course he was amazing at softball too. And we left the softball field over here at this camp, and we're walking across the field towards the cafeteria, and all of a sudden there's this big hand on my shoulder like this. And I turn around, and guess who was there? Right, the Dennis, you guys don't understand, the Dennis Gamoff, okay? And, okay, I'm not 12 or 13 anymore, but I still remember this. I remember he looked at me and said, hey, Dave, I've been watching you this week. I see in you somebody who could be a really good leader. I see in you somebody who could be a really good leader. You know what I call that now? I call that, there's the four most important letters in a leader's alphabet. I see in you. I see in you. And I'll tell you what, when you start with multiplication thinking, you start thinking different. Hey, I got this dream that's bigger than me. I can't pull it off. Then all of a sudden you start seeing the world differently. You start looking for the potential of other people because you need these other people to pull off this big dream, these 105 church plants. And all of a sudden you start seeing things and people going like, you know what? I bet this guy right here, I bet this guy not only could lead worship, but I bet he could start a whole worship school. Because we're going to we need 100 more worship pastors, right? And not only is he planting a church, but there ought to be like a network that out of that it comes all kinds of reproducing churches, right? And you start seeing the people around you, you start seeing the potential in them. And it's that big dream that catalyzes it. And you give them permission. and some of you are in this room because somebody, I'm asking the Holy Spirit right now to bring it to mind, because somebody saw something you didn't see in yourself. And they gave you permission to do something they probably shouldn't have because you weren't ready for it. But they said, nah, go get them. They gave you a little pat on the butt, right? And they put you in the game. And that's why you're here today. And why are we being, and let's not be stingy. Let's do the same thing for other people. So we have to change how we think. We have to change how we see. Let me give you the next one. Put your hand on your heart. Okay, put your hand on your heart. Here's where the shift. This is called disciple making. This is a shift in how you share. You're not going to just share what you know, okay? We're not going to just share what we know anymore because content is readily available everywhere. We're going to share our life. So with those people, okay, this big dream that we now see potential in them, we start telling them, we start sharing our life with them. And we bring them closer and we start actually discipling people. One of the things, when we got to write this book, Hero Maker, Warren Bird, my co-author, he's one of the best researchers really in the world. He did a little homework on this, and he took a look at all the Gospels and all the different events of Jesus in the Gospels, and he basically put it into two different categories. Time that Jesus spent with the crowds and time that Jesus spent with just his disciples. The time he spent with the masses and the time he spent with the few. The time where he's in front of all kinds of people, Sermon on the Mount, and the time where he's just, hanging out with the guys. And what he discovered is that about 3/4 of Jesus' time in the Gospels was spent with the few, was spent with the disciples, was spent with just a handful. In fact, specifically, 73% of his time. 73% of his time was spent with the few, and only 27% of his time was spent with the many. So now I want you to think about this. If we're going to be hero makers, That means we got to spend some time with just a few of those people that we've had ICNU conversations with. And so I would challenge you, try to allocate your time. So, okay, 27% is working towards Sunday and the big events with the crowd, but 73% of my time is going to be with the few. Because I'm going to help send them eventually, help them realize their potential. There's this little verse in John chapter 3, verse 22, and it says, Jesus spent some time with them. Jesus spent some time with them. And it's actually, there's a composite Greek word called diatribo. And diatribo is two different words, and it's like to rub against. And it literally means like Jesus spent time with them. Jesus spent time just rubbing off on them. Jesus spent time rubbing off on them, all right? Do me a favor, if you're close to somebody, just get up next to them and rub on them a little bit, okay? Just go ahead and rub on them a little bit. There you go, that's right. Yeah, that's diatribo right there. That's what you need to do. That's what you need to. It's so funny. I've done this talk at several different places. I did this talk at a couple different places in Europe, and when I did it in Europe with the English folks, I was like, and they did diatribe. We just lean over and rub next to somebody, and they just looked at me. But then it was funny. Then we got to Madrid, Spain, and I did it with the Spanish-speaking folks, and I was like, and Jesus did diatribe. We just rub on somebody, and they were just like all over each other, you know. They were all into it. But that's what we have to, that's what disciple making is. It's not just sharing what you know, okay? It's sharing your heart. You're rubbing off on each other, okay? Then here's the fourth practice. Put your hands out like this, okay? This is a shift in the blessing, okay? This is what we call gift activating. Instead of just asking God to bless you, come on, do it with me, stick them out there, stick them out. Instead of just asking God to bless you, you ask God to bless the people you're sending out. Not just bless me, but bless the people you're sending out. And I'll tell you, maybe this one's kind of, I don't know, I still don't get this sometimes. I get it wrong. Like as I was getting ready to speak here, I was writing in my journal, praying about it, my natural instinct, and it's not necessarily bad, it's just not great. My natural instinct was to go like, God, please help me to say the right words. And that's a good prayer. You should pray that. That's fine. But you know what's a better prayer? God, whatever it is that these people out here need, help them to get it. Whatever they need. Because, and I think when we get to a certain level of maturity, if we're going to really fully activate other people's gifts, it can't be about blessing us, it has to be about blessing them. I was at the invitation of Bishop Oscar Miro. I was speaking at Nairobi Chapel. It's a great church in Nairobi. And kind of like what happened tonight. I was really proud of you guys. I mean, that tells me you guys are going to do this. He invited 31 people to come on the stage. 31 people come on the stage. I thought it was the choir, okay? Turned out it wasn't the choir. This is 31 people that had finished up their, what was it called? Their Canera Leadership Training Program. And they were getting ready to go plant churches. And exactly like what you did, Ken, he anointed all of them, and then he asked everybody, go ahead and reach out your hands just like you did before. Go ahead and reach out your hands like that. Come on, come on, come on. He had all of them do like that, just like that. And that day, they commissioned 31 folks to go plant brand new churches in Kibera, which is the slums, the largest slums in all of Africa, but it's right there in Nairobi. And they sent them out. And here's the thing. Notice how each of these build on each other. There's multiplication thinking. You start having a bigger vision than you can accomplish. And then you start identifying some people, okay, that can help accomplish God's big dream. Then you spend some time with them. You diatribo, all right? But there comes a point, and this is the hard part, where you will commission them and you will send them out. Let me just say this. That person that you have, who maybe is your associate, is not meant to be your perpetual associate. That person who's your assistant, they're not meant to be your assistant forever. That person you're apprenticing, they're not supposed to stay there as a co-leader for all time. You're supposed to raise them up, and you pray, and you hope they do greater things, just like Jesus did. That you go out and you do greater things than I ever did. Wow. And you pray over them, you commission, you send them out. Just like a proud mom or a proud dad, you send them out and say, you go get them. That's what we have to do. That's fully activating their gifts. And here's the last one, okay? Let me see, give me some fingers here like you're counting, okay? This one's also really important. This is a shift in how you count. And this fifth one's called kingdom building. Instead of counting who's coming to my thing, What's most important as far as my scoreboard, my scorecard, is who am I sending out to do God's thing? I'm not so concerned about how many people are coming to my student ministry or showing up at my church, but how many people am I sending out to plant brand new churches so we can multiply this thing over and over again, and we actually see a movement of God that actually happens. I am convinced of this, and I think this is probably true for most all North American leaders. In fact, most all Western leaders in the churches. Here's the question that most of us lose sleep over and we wake up thinking about. And here it is. The question is this: how do I grow my church? Okay? I have been there, and I get it. I so get it. I am a pastor, okay? I like having a full room. It's awesome. And it's a good question. It's not a great question. A far better question I would love to have every one of you lose sleep over. And if we would all lose sleep over this question, we'll get to that 105 churches. It's this: how do we multiply God's kingdom? What if instead of every day instead of thinking how do I grow my church, what if this group, this whole district said, you know what, how do we multiply not just my church but God's kingdom? Isn't that a better question? Well, something's happening here. Either I'm going long or we're getting ready for an invitation. This is good. All right, last story. No, bring it on. I like it. This will work. I remember I had a meeting. One of our locations is called a Yellow Box, and it's probably our largest location in Chicago there. And I had a meeting with a guy named Sam Stevens, and I remember I actually looked at my phone and it was Sam Stevens, and I asked my assistant at the time. I said, "Hey, who's Sam?" And she was like, "I don't know. I thought you knew." I said, "What? You don't know?" And she said, "No." She said, "I don't know." And I was like, I said, but you're responsible for my schedule. How come I'm meeting with people neither one of us know? And she's pretty tough, and she was like, "Oh, I don't know, but he's down in the cafe, so go talk to him." All right. So I said, "Okay." So I go down there, and I put on my pastor happy face, and I stuck out my hand and said, "Hey, Sam, how you doing?" And I said, "Tell me your story." And so Sam starts telling me his story. And part of his story, he said, "Well, my story kind of starts back in the 60s. My dad started a mission in India planting churches." And I was like, "Oh, really?" So I'm kind of interested because now we're talking church planting, right? I love that stuff. And I said, "Well, tell me, how's it going?" He said, "Well, from the early 60s to about 1992, they planted 200 churches." I know, so I was like, "Wow, this is awesome." And so now I'm engaged. I'm going like, "Okay, thanks for this appointment," right? He's a super humble guy. I'm having to kind of drag details out of him. And I said, "So what happened after that?" And he said, "Well, actually part of the story was I was visiting my folks, and my dad and I stayed up late in the night talking, had a really great conversation. And he said the last thing my dad said before I left, and my mom already gone to bed, was told me, he said, 'Hey, son, whatever you do, don't lose the vision. Don't lose the vision.'" And he said, I didn't really think that much of it because my dad always talked that way, kind of. And I left, but he said my dad got very ill that night. In fact, so ill they had to take him to the hospital. And then after getting to the hospital, he actually went into a coma. And I did get to see him, but I never got to speak to him again. That was the last thing I heard my dad say. Last thing my dad said to me was, "Son, don't lose the vision." And he passed away. And he said, so I took over this mission that he'd started, really. And he said, the one thing I did different, though, he said, is I kind of made a little tweak. I said to all our church planters, I said, what I want you to do, instead of just planting the church and then leading it, what I want you to do is every year bring someone alongside you that you're going to train to plant a church, and you show them how you do it. So while you're leading that church, you show them how to do it. Then at the end of that year, you send them out and let them go plant a church. And then the next year, you take someone else as like an apprentice, and you take them alongside you while you're leading that church, and you train them, and you show them how to plant a church, and then you send them out. And just keep doing that every year. And we just kind of made that a part of what we did. And I'm going like, oh, wow. And I said, well, I was curious. I was like, well, how's it going now? And he said, well, so far we have about 70,000 churches. And I was like, what? I mean, I'm serious. I was like glad I was sitting down. I might have fell over. And I think he must have misread my face because he said, oh, but we're hoping for 100,000 churches. Well, later on I found out, and I still don't know how we got that initial appointment, but his name's Sam Stevens. He's the president of the India Gospel League. And since that time, we've become friends, and he has planted more than 100,000 churches. And he wrote a book about it, and I got to write a foreword for it. And it's just unbelievable. Okay, but I want just, again, okay, think about how did that happen? My observation real quick, well, Sam decided he wasn't going to be the hero, but instead he wanted to be a hero maker. And there was multiplication thinking happening, right? There was a dream of 100,000 churches, a dream that was so big it made him dependent on God. And what did he do? He asked all his church planters, you know what I want you to do is I want you to have these I see and you conversations where you find somebody who could plant a church. You bring them alongside you, right? You give them permission to do the thing that God's calling them to do. And then you spend a year with them, diatribo, right? Disciple multiplying. And then in that year, after you've spent a year with them showing them how to do it, then you fully activate their gifts and you commission them and you bless them and you send them out. And then at the end, if someone asks you, how's it going? Don't tell them how big your church. Sam's church, but he leads is probably, a couple hundred people. No, you tell them, don't count who's showing up to your thing. You count who you're sending out to do God's thing. Oh, we've planted 70,000 churches, right? Here's the thing, and I'll shut up after this. Listen, church, we were created for movement. It is in our DNA. And we have everything we need to do it. And I think it starts, though, with us being leaders just like Jesus, who are going like, you know what? I'm not going to be the hero. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at all the folks in my church that God's put me, okay, to be the shepherd of, and I'm going to be a hero maker. A hero maker. All right, let's pray. Father, I do. Lord, I ask for the faith, I ask for the vision, and I ask for the strategy for this group of people to come together and go like, no, we want to be a part of this greater vision of 1 million churches in the next 7 years. Lord, I do. I ask that you give us clarity about how we can do at least 105 of those. Lord, it's who, before you left planet Earth, you said Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, ends of the earth. That's what you meant for us. And so, Lord, we do. We asked for that. You told us to ask, and we're asking. And we promise we will remain humble, and we will give you all the credit and all the glory. And it's in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen.